Thanks for listening to the Gray Ave Podcast. We meet inspiring people from around the world and learn from them. From entrepreneurship, health, travel, lifestyle, and more. We are also on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher Radio. Rate and write us a review. You can also download each episode on www.grayjabesi.com. Enjoy the show.
Hey, what's up? My name is Gray, and this is another episode of the Gray Ave Podcast. And today, our guest is Stephen Larkin from African New Energies. And if you're not familiar with African New Energies, it's a company that has a simple vision to give 600 million people in Africa clean, affordable electricity for the first time. It plans to do this by using its technology to find natural gas and use the founder's share of the profits to replace the natural gas over time with solar. Sounds incredible. And what's more fascinating about this is that A&E has been crowdfunded entirely. So Steve has managed to raise £6 million in a period of 3 years just by crowdfunding. So that's why I had to find him and ask him exactly how he did it. And he was also speaking in Cape Town Startup Grind about crowdfunding itself. For those of you who are not familiar with crowdfunding, it's basically a practice of funding a project or venture by raising monetary contributions from a large number of people. Basically, it's like you having a good idea and you get other people to support you, like friends or just like strangers who actually believe in your idea. Sounds like a great idea, which it is, but it's incredibly hard to make it work, let alone to raise £6 million in 3 years, just like Steve and his team has managed to. So we started off the conversation with founding the company, how did he get started, and then we jumped into crowdfunding, which is almost the entire part of this interview, and then we jumped into the future of A&E. So I hope you enjoy it and pick up something from it like I did. And remember to leave me a 5-star review on iTunes and subscribe to the Gray Ave Podcast on your podcast app. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much and enjoy my interview with Stephen Larkin.
My name's Stephen Larkin. I'm the CEO of African New Energies and co-founder. African New Energies was specifically founded with a basic and particular mission, and that is to provide everybody in sub-Saharan Africa who doesn't have electricity with electricity for the first time, and eventually through clean sources.
Right. And you're the co-founder, as you said. It's fascinating. What's more fascinating to me is like, how did the idea of just like we want to provide electricity to the Saharan Africa, just how did that come to your mind?
Well, it was the first day of university where I'd come from a really privileged background, been to a top private school. I think anybody in South Africa who grew up in apartheid can be construed as privileged relative to the average. But I was particularly privileged, and I was in residence, felt very comfortable at the University of Cape Town because I'd been at school down the road, so I knew a lot of people. And my roommate couldn't have been from a more different background. He was from a place called Bushbuck Ridge, which is not far from the Kruger Park. And he was in one of the old, what were called Bantustans. They were a designated tribal black area where the apartheid government divided up 87% of the land to the 13% of the white population and 13% of the land to 87% of the black population. And he was from a place called Gazankulu. Now, to give you an idea of just how challenging it was for him, he was the only person, not just in his village, but in the entire Gazankulu, to get to tertiary education that year.
Wow.
And he looked at this residence room, and I was looking at the girls' res next door, and sort of said, what are you looking forward to in Freshers Week? Because I can tell you what I'm looking forward to. And he said, well, the biggest thing is that this is the first time in my life that I'm going to be able to study at night with light. He had gone through an entire primary and secondary educational career without having light at night, which means that when the sun went down, that's when his education stopped. And this gentleman is now a world-leading expert in a highly technical area. It's computer audits in the gold industry. And I was thinking, well, if he could do so much with the light, imagine what 600 million other Africans could do with that light. And from that day on, I realized what I wanted to do with my life. This was a problem that needed solving. And it was completely arrogant to think that I could solve it. But something inside me just knew that I could. And I started my first business when I was 30 years old. And it was coming up with ways of optimizing feedstock production, which in South Africa is predominantly coal, in the South African mines. And I gradually drifted more towards my real passion, which was renewables. And the real breakthrough on this project and the vision came in 2011 when I was called by Utoni Nujomu, who was at the time the foreign minister of Namibia, to say, could we create a solar strategy to give all Namibians electricity? Now, Namibia is one of the best places on earth, if not the best place on earth, to try that. So I jumped at the chance with alacrity, because firstly, it's got the world's highest levels of irradiation. In other words, if you're going to put solar into some place, for every kilowatt peak of solar panel capacity, you'll get more electricity out of certain parts of Namibia than anywhere else in the world. So that's a major tick.
Right.
The second reason that Namibia is such an interesting and place to do it is the fact that it is, after Mongolia, it is the least densely populated country on earth, which means that the traditional economics of transmission grids don't work. There's no point in spending hundreds of millions of rands to put a transmission line a few hundred kilometers to a community of a couple of hundred families. You'll never recover that. So it only makes sense, if you're going to give them electricity, you've got to give it to them off grid. There's no other economic way of doing that. Now, the third reason that I think is of paramount importance in Namibia, but this is extremely important elsewhere, is deforestation. Now, Namibia is 99% non-arable. So it's pretty shocking that 63% of the population uses unsustainable deforestation for their energy needs.
Wow, yeah, that's not good.
So if there was any place where you want to start a universal electricity access program, Namibia is a great place to start. There are also political reasons why it's really good. It's regarded as the lowest political risk in Africa.
Right.
It's politically stable. It's got a very good regulatory environment around the mining ministry, the energy ministry, and the electricity regulator. So, and a very well-run electricity utility also. So I was really excited by that, but sadly the solar just did not make financial sense, even in Namibia.
Wow.
So we had to come up with an interim strategy, which is to find natural gas and then to convert the natural gas into electricity and use the profits from that to do the universal electricity access program.
Are you still 30 by then?
Pardon?
By that time?
Oh, no. Lost a lot of hair,
Okay.
and much of it became grey and white. And by this time, I'm now 44.
Oh, okay. So now let's move to let's just skip a few steps and come to this point today. What's A&E up to, and like what's the current state of the company now?
A&E is effectively, and I say this with a wry smile, an oil and gas exploration company. We're looking to prove up natural gas. We are confident that we will find it. And we are planning to drill next year. We are planning to list next year.
Yes.
And we are, should we strike next year, that will enable us to immediately commence with building the natural gas plant.
Right.
So that's where we are. We are also looking to start on a much smaller scale, energy-saving interventions, and also solar within South Africa, so that we can build up the skill set for when we really do take it very large in Namibia, that we have made had our teething mistakes and got good solid processes in on a smaller scale, so that we can scale it up, so that we're not starting from scratch.
Right. That's good to know. So now take me between the time that you got confirmation in Namibia that it's going to happen to this point now. Like, what was the gap? What did you had to do to actually say, okay, it's happening? So what's the next step? Was it raising money and or like getting skill sets, like skillful people to do it, or finding the gas itself? What was the process?
Well, it's all of the above. It was very difficult for us as a group of solar consultants to even recommend that natural gas was a plausible option. Unfortunately, there was no other financial option that Namibia could manage within its constraints, both political and financial. So it was really difficult for us as a company who was passionate about saving the planet, about reducing deforestation, about reducing the carbon footprint, to recommend a strategy that could have an adverse impact on carbon emissions. We overcame our reservations, most particularly because of the persuasion by a local community to invite us in and share their knowledge of natural gas and oil seepage. And we ended up applying for the acreage in conjunction with that local community. They are shareholders of African New Energies. And I think that the government was swayed by the fact that we were deeply committed to the community and they were deeply committed to us, by giving us very modest financial targets, extremely reasonable by global standards terms, so that we didn't have to raise very much money in the first place.
Right.
Then we, what was probably game-changing for us was there was a spat between the British government and the EU over unfair state aid. The British government has extremely generous tax incentives for angel investors, but the companies had to be based in the UK. The European Union sued them, and 4 years later the European Union won, where that it was deemed to be state aid, and therefore Britain was forced to make those benefits available to anybody in the EU. Britain responded in a huff. It was George Osborne, the incoming Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is the equivalent of Pravin Gordon. I know he's no longer. Gigaba now. Who said, well, F you EU, we're going to make this global. And that put us in a remarkable position.
Right, yeah.
Where we could use British investors claiming their British PAYE and their British taxes to develop our project in Namibia.
Yes.
I think that Britain is globally unprecedented in allowing tax breaks to be deployed on a completely different continent where the main benefits will not go to the British taxman.
Right.
It's an extraordinary set of circumstances. And when we got that, we were very quickly able to start fundraising. And then a second thing that we did do, just to talk about the skills, was that this is a vast area. It's about 2.2 million hectares.
Yes.
And to give you an idea, I think Malawi is about 10 million hectares.
Yes.
So it's about 20% of Malawi.
Wow, yeah.
It's huge. And I went to the world's leading expert on seismology.
Yeah.
And he works for Saudi Aramco, and he's the most published academic in the world and the most cited academic in the world on seismology. That's where you make explosions and the shock bounces down, and the way it bounces off different rocks enables them to understand the geological geometry. And it is most oil and gas exploration is predicated on that system. I asked him, well, what do you need to do? And he said, well, I would shoot 10,000 line kilometers of 2D seismic, focusing on 5 to 10% of the area. And even with Saudi Aramco's buying power, I can't see any change out of $250 million
right
before you discover. Now, there's no way in hell that an institutional investor would give that money, and there's no way else anybody else would have that money. So we realized that if we were going to work with the community and we were going to do this, we needed to find a new way to explore.
Yeah.
So the co-founder, Sheikh Smatsadidi, is an exceptionally gifted mathematician. I'm what's called a heuristic mathematician. I'm not particularly talented in maths, but I do have almost a sixth sense for the numbers. And Brendan Raw is a freakily talented programmer. So we are quite a powerful algorithmic team.
Right.
And we realized that in our days in optimization work in the mines, we were very good at putting sensors in very difficult, challenging environments, like physically challenging environments where it's humid, where they're outside, where it's very dusty. So we knew how to put sensors into a ruggedized environment. We knew how to collect the data, and we knew how to analyze the data and derive algorithms from them with machine learning. And we realized also that the oil and gas industry, counterintuitively, is remarkably backward. And I think one set of statistics illustrates that better than anywhere else. And that is the IT spend per person per year by industry. The average bank spends about $8,000 per person per year. The average telecoms company, about $3,000. The average manufacturer, $1,000. And the average retailer, about $800. The average company in the extractive industry spends $80.
Wow. That's very low.
It's ridiculous. They're still in the Stone Age, despite the engineering marvels in some of their processes. Their actual use of IT is mind-bogglingly limited.
Wow.
So we found that there were a lot of low-hanging fruit algorithmically, a lot of obscure techniques where with better statistical analysis and better statistical tools, which we were able to apply to it, we could derive a competitive advantage with a new way of exploring. And this has resonated with investors, and that enabled us to raise about £2.5 million. The founders believe in the project, so we sold our houses. It took some explaining to our wives, but we didn't believe that we could take money off investors unless we were absolutely full-time committed to it, and we had put every penny we had into this project. And then we found that we were really supported as well by governments. The South African government gave us a grant from the Special Program for Industrial Innovation, which incidentally was how Mark Shuttleworth got going. And we also won a tender of €1 million to supply the steel for Project Ekwezi, which is an offshore natural gas platform near Mossel Bay. And we provided IT services, VAT recovery services, the UN work was paid. So that was a fair amount of money, at least, a couple of £1 million. And now that we've found that the industry has absolutely crashed, there are a lot of fantastically skilled people on very good pensions who have 40 years of experience who are sitting around at home really bored because they've been retired off or made redundant because there's $300 billion of exploration projects that have been cancelled in the last 18 months. And they are giving us their skills for shares. So we've somehow scraped together, and there's a good, almost about £750,000 from that source. So with all of that, we've managed to get together over £6 million, which is over 100 million rand. We're in South Africa now. And we need to raise, it's how long is a piece of string, because you always want to do more exploration before you drill. So there's always a balancing act. But we reckon we probably need to raise about another £8 million. And we're getting wonderful support now from the German government through one of our partner companies, where the German government is not only giving brilliant skills from the University of Braunschweig and the Institute of Flight Guidance and Control, but they're also giving us a grant to be able to develop new airborne surveying techniques using gyrocopters, which the algorithm is really fussy. So we need to fly lower to the ground than would be safe in a helicopter and certainly in a fixed-wing aircraft. So we've had to come up with new ways to collect that data very close to the ground in a safe way, and the German government is funding that.
Right. So that's hard, like you dealing with something that's never been there before. So it's like you have to probably pretty much figure out every next step of the way, eh?
Yeah, which is kind of helpful because it's helpful that we're not from the industry.
Yes.
So we don't know how the industry does it because we've never been in the industry. We're maths guys who know one or two things about sensors. And so I suspect that, we have made mistakes. We will make more mistakes.
Sure.
The Namibian government has been patient with us and we hope will continue to be because they know that we are taking that approach. But what we have noticed is that when techniques do work, they represent an improvement to the way things in the industry are done.
Yeah.
So, but yes, there've been lots of mistakes and there will be lots more mistakes.
Yeah.
And I don't apologize for that.
Have you always been this person of that approach of just like, let's try something new. If it works, that's okay. If it doesn't, you're also okay with it.
My best friend described me as the world's most skilled failure. So absolutely, it's
right.
What I grew up with.
All right. So let's talk about the funding side of it. When you thought about going for funding, why didn't you go the conventional way? Like, was there a problem to just go do the listings? You weren't eligible for that, or it was what got you to the point?
We hit layer after layer after layer of problems.
Oh, okay,
and I'll give you a couple of examples.
Yeah.
To list on AIM, which is the alternative investment market, which is the junior market on the London Stock Exchange, which is equivalent to Altex in South Africa. We were told we needed to give a competent persons report. And what that is basically a geologist's equivalent to audited financial statements.
Right.
So you get a competent person to look at your estimates and say, yep, we agree with those, we're prepared to sign them off. You pay a fee, and they have to be completely independent. And that is one of the requirements of listing. Now, if you're using completely different techniques, there wasn't a geologist who could verify those techniques. So we couldn't have got signed off. So we couldn't get onto the stock exchange initially. So that's the first problem. The second problem is that if you list on AIM, it costs a lot of money. And the biggest cost is not a particularly obvious one. And that is that people on AIM have such short memories. And they're so trigger happy with buying and selling stocks. And if you're not constantly updating the stock market with each new exciting development, which as a small company is impossible to do. You can't have a major new global breakthrough every week. Their share price tends to sag. So what they do, the successful ones do, is they spend millions on what's called financial PR, financial public relations, so that they're constantly pumping the market with news and fluff, that there's all this activity. But that's a huge cost. So we worked out, we thought, it's going to cost us about 10 million quid to do it. And then we worked out, well, over 7 years, it's going to cost you 500,000 to list, 300,000 to stay listed, to pay your nomad, your nominated advisor, auditors, respectable independent board, etc., and $1 million a year on financial PR. Well, that was more than we needed for the whole project. So there's an enormous cost to listing, and you have to raise a huge amount of money to justify that cost. And then the third practical reason is that if you are going to raise that much money, you have to get the support of institutional investors. Now, institutional investors hire geologists, geophysicists, who use standard techniques, seismic-based techniques, to assess whether to invest in you or not. We weren't using seismic. So it would have been completely, it's not that they're bad people, we don't hold it against them, but it would have been outside their mandate, and they wouldn't have been allowed to put money into us. So a listing at that point was a no-go. But alluding to the last point, the fourth point, is alluding to your previous question, you're going to mess up. And listing, once you are listed, the markets are brutally unforgiving. And if you mess up once, they're not going to forgive you again, and they're not going to give you any more money. So we decided we could only list once we had sufficient money to pay for a 10-well program and to have completed our pre-drilling program, and that's exactly what we're doing.
And talking of the impact of that, like how is it going to impact the countries involved? Like for Namibia, for example, how big is it going to be affected?
If we succeed.
If you succeed. Which you're more likely to do, because you've been going through all these phases and,
Well, look, we could do more studies and come up with negative results, although I doubt it. And that is perfectly statistically plausible. But if we do succeed, Namibia will be a very different country. And we must work really hard to ensure that it's a very different country in a good way. Firstly, the sheer revenue involved, based on a prospective resource of 1.6 billion barrels. By the time we peak production, that alone will increase GDP from current levels by 50%. which a single company doing that is very material. But more importantly, Namibia will become energy independent.
Right.
Currently, it imports almost 60% of its electricity from South Africa, Zambia, to some extent from Zimbabwe as well. And becoming energy self-sufficient in an energy-starved subcontinent is very significant, because they want to do many mega projects on the mining side. And I did a bit of work it's longer ago than that, and now about 12 years ago, on the Scorpion mine. And Scorpion, when it opened, one mine, one location in a country the size of Texas used 20% of the grid. Now, what is scary for Namibia's development, if they want to develop their world-class mining resources, it's quicker to say what Namibia doesn't have than what it does have. They need electricity. So Namibia will attract a lot more money into its downstream mining industry if investors know that they're going to get reliable, inexpensive electricity. But the third impact is why we started the company.
Yeah.
And that is, and this boggles my mind that this hasn't been done.
Right.
For $100 per household, we and the founders, Brendan Shakes and I, are going to donate this out of our share. A household can, if we spend $100 and get a bit clever on the grants, we can give them a 40-watt panel. We can give them a small charge controller and battery, LED lighting, a subsidized solar cooker, and most importantly, better insulation.
Yeah.
And that can work on an informal dwelling in a peri-urban area or in a rural area, because it will largely be portable. It won't be fixed to any structure like on the roof. Now, for $100, the payback on that, not that we'll be seeking a payback, but the payback on that is around about 50 cents a day, because on average they're spending about $6 Namibian per day on wood.
Yeah.
So they will now have that $6 a day, and more importantly, they'll be able to read at night. They'll be able to use an iPad at night. For another $35, they can get an iPad.
Yeah.
Now, do you know how much it'll cost to give 63% of the population that?
Yeah, it would cost a lot of money.
No, it won't. $25 million. Within the context of the numbers that we are talking, that is a rounding error.
Wow. Yeah, that's
Isn't
really
that
low to what
an amazing legacy for A&E to leave?
Yes, absolutely.
And it's not a lot of money.
Right. Yeah, it's so fascinating that this kind of solution has never been proposed. Like, just
it's crazy.
Anywhere, yeah.
I mean, if you look at German grant funding, Germany's incredibly generous to Namibia.
Yes.
It's over $200 million a year. And we modeled for every kilowatt hour that a developing country gets, it's worth $3.50. Now, it only costs 6 or 7 US cents to create, which means that the cost of creating that electricity is 1/50th of the value of people like my roommate being able to read at night.
Correct.
So that is why we compromised by going for natural gas, because we could do what we wanted to do far more easily with finance than begging and groveling to aid agencies where there are all kinds of vested interests and they probably wouldn't trust us in the first place.
Yes.
We had to create the wealth, own it, so that we could give it away.
Right. But then where did you gain the trust to say, okay, this actually could work? Or like, how did you come up with the suggestion? Who suggested the idea of saying let's go for crowdfunding? Because it's usually for small businesses. It's known for like small businesses. They just want to raise a little bit of money, but on a large scale, it's unheard of.
Look, it's actually not unheard of. I was hoping that within 2 years we could break the world record, but there's no way we will. The world record is now held by Bitcoin version 2.0, which is called Ethereum. And they've just raised in 2 months 139 million euros. So they've smashed us up the park by a couple of orders of magnitude.
Yeah.
So I know that crowdfunding is increasing exponentially, firstly. But how we got involved in it, very briefly, it's a funny story. When I started the company, I said to a friend of mine from school, a very good friend of mine, Gordon Robinson, I said, listen, I've got a huge idea. It's going to be massive, but I don't have a business plan. I don't have a revenue model. I definitely don't have a product and don't even think about sales, let alone profits. And he said, yeah, that sounds like a fantastic idea. And it all started off with 32 of my friends from school and from our rival / brother school 200 yards down the road, putting R1 million in 4 days.
Uh-oh.
And why did they do that? Well, they're very close sort of links as friends because we all grew up together, so high level of trust. And people thought, let's just put in a couple of £1,000, which is a huge weekend in London.
Yeah.
So it's not going to change your life if you lose it.
Yeah.
And he's had the guts to actually go out there and try and make the world a better place. Let's go and help him. And one of the most powerful and inspiring things that really gets me out of bed every morning about crowdfunding, and we actually proved this statistically, where we did a survey. We asked a group of people who were not investors in our company, if they were to invest, what would drive them to invest. And 52% of them said, because you want to give everybody electricity. That is the most important reason why we will invest.
Yes.
25% wanted tax breaks, and less than a quarter of them cared about financial returns. And I've spoken to a lot of other crowdfunding companies, and this comes through time and time again. Investors go into crowdfunding not because they want to secure their pension.
Yeah.
It's a bit of fun at the top of their portfolio where they want to feel good about making the world a better place, but they might make money out of it.
Right.
A&E is a funny one in that when it does work, we're actually going to instantly create almost 100 millionaires overnight.
Right.
Dollar millionaires. Because people got in very early. Lots of people got in very early. And the company's value has increased exponentially since then.
What did your friends thought of you before that? When you came up with the idea, they just thought that, okay, we can, because I think it sounds to me like they invested in you partly.
That's absolutely the case, and it's always the case with crowdfunding.
Yes,
where the biggest question or not even question, the biggest criterion whether somebody goes for a crowdfunder or not is, do they actually like the founder?
Yeah.
And if they don't, they're not going to invest no matter how compelling the proposition. Do they share the same values as the founder? And that was very much the case. Yeah. It's like, Steve's a bright, hardworking guy who has a certain ethical stance on life. Let's give him a shot. We don't have a clue what he's talking about, but hopefully he does.
Right. Are you going to give us three key points to be likable and to get funded?
Well, the first one is don't be too like me.
Oh.
No, well, I don't know if I can give you three. It almost sounds cliched, but you've got to have a goal that is bigger than you and bigger than them.
Right.
where if this business is successful, it's going to make a large number of people better off. And if you sort of go out there and are about giving, you're far more interesting, and you're far more you're going to get far more support than if it's, oh no, you're buying at 1 cent and you get out at £1 in 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
That really doesn't resonate with people on crowdfunding. Might do on AIM, but certainly not. And funny enough, I know a lot of AIM speculators and investors, and I actually go drinking with them, and they're great fun.
Yeah.
They're fantastic people. Not one of them have invested in A&E because they're not financially, they're financially driven. They're not socially driven. A&E doesn't really appeal to that size of them, even though it will make much more money than they're speculating on AIM.
Right. So how does the shareholder structure work in a crowdfunded company?
A very good question, and a lot of this is tax driven.
Yeah.
It has to be really simple. When you have preferential shareholders, when you have secured loans, where you have options and paybacks, the tax authorities really frown on that. They insist that all shareholders are treated equally.
Right.
And so A&E's structure is typical of that, in that we have a number of shares, we have a whole lot of shareholders, everybody has the same rights,
right?
And it's as simple as that. So if you did have complex share structures, you wouldn't get the really generous tax breaks in most cases.
Right.
So they tend to be really simple, and we're no different.
All right. And another question that I wanted to ask you was that what platform did you use to raise all this money? Like publicly on the public level of things, you have websites that help people to crowdfund. I don't know how you went about your own.
That's a really important question for people out there who want to do crowdfunding. If you go onto a public platform, and we have done that, we did one very good raise with Angel's Den.
Right.
And, you know, it's a British platform. It's not the biggest, but in my opinion is the best.
Right.
In that they bring crowdfunding investors who add a huge amount of value to the business.
Right.
And yeah, some of our best investors have come through Angel's Den. But what is really important is that you pre-sell at least 60% of it before it goes public.
Right.
If you don't do that, your crowdfunding investors are not going to come in because they're going to think, oh, this is never going to get funded. They like that feeling of scarcity that they might not get in. And so you have to have pre-sold it. So what we do is we have worked with brokers before, and now we're creating an in-house broker, which is in the painstaking process of being regulated by the FCA in the UK, and another broker that's being regulated by the Financial Services Board in South Africa, where we buy up lists, where we use social media and events to build up leads and to convert those. So that's offline. So although they will appear online, the sale is very much done offline and beforehand. It's very rare in crowdfunding, and I can't see this happening with A&E, that you can just put up, you know, a very good video and it just gets funded. It's very rare.
Yeah.
You have to work extremely hard to get to that 60%, and then you have to do loads of events, email shots, and your email list is your most powerful tool.
Yes.
Because it tends to be people who know you. And I've had remarkable instances of a friend. I wasn't even close to this guy, and I hadn't seen him since school, and we weren't particularly good friends. And I thought, gosh, £20,000 has just arrived in our bank account. Who's it from?
Yeah.
It's from Oman. I don't know anybody in Oman. It turned out that this guy had moved to Oman.
Yeah.
Hadn't seen me since school, but I posted a really cool picture of a leopard that was on the concession. And he thought, yeah, you're doing fantastic stuff. I'm making good money tax-free. I'm going to take a punt on it.
Yeah.
And so your crowd very often is where you don't think it is.
Yeah.
It tends to be people you've known for a long time, and an awful lot of it is by word and mouth and by referral.
Right.
So it's kind of a myth that you just slap it online and the internet just makes it happen. That is absolutely not the case.
I've seen people who have tried that and miserably not even get close to what they wanted to, because of that approach of set up the system site and you just click and it works.
Yeah. And I mean, it's really interesting to talk to Louise de Smet and Hilary de Smet, because they taught me something really important. And I must go back a bit.
Yeah.
The first job that I didn't get fired from was as the finance and media finance analyst for Unilever in the UK.
Yeah.
It's actually quite a prestigious job. And Unilever is one of the biggest, in fact, the second biggest FMCG company in the world. And it spends 25% of its turnover on above-the-line advertising. Now, this is what I was brought up with. If you want to do a massive advertising campaign, you spend 80% on TV, 5% on billboards, 15% on radio, and that's pretty much how you get the next big deodorant out there. Yes. And that's what I grew up with, understanding media.
Correct.
And learning from some of the very best brains in the industry. How social media has changed things, and changed things in a profound way, in a really empowering way for entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Is that I've probably got 3,000 people whom I know.
Yeah.
I know lots of people know a lot more than that, but that's about the number of people I know. And those people are mostly on LinkedIn.
Yes.
And LinkedIn is an interesting statistical tool, because I know that those 3,000 people know about 3 million people.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they know somebody who knows someone, and that's 3 million people. And that is your most powerful tool, just by communicating with them. By saying, hey, James, I haven't seen you since school. Would you like to have a drink sometime?
Yeah.
And, you just tell them about what you're doing. You never sell to them. And you'll find that if they're in a position to do something, they will when they're ready to.
Sure.
So it's just about, it's the way social media is going. And this is such an important lesson to anyone who wants to crowdfund.
Yeah.
Is that it's one-on-one communication that matters, not a mail merge.
That was about my next question, but you just answered it already.
Yeah. It's not about a mail merge.
Yeah.
It's about writing a sincere individual email where you genuinely want to know how the other person is doing.
Yeah.
And it's about building a relationship with them. And not sort of saying, oh, I haven't seen you since school. Do you want to invest? That's going to really turn somebody off.
Yeah.
But so you've got to take a slightly longer view, and it's about gently building up relationships. And then what is really exciting that's starting to happen is that just as when I started my work with solar, I became perceived as an expert, even though there were people who were far more qualified than I was in Africa.
Yes.
That's starting to happen with crowdfunding, because we have been relatively successful. A 2.5 million raised from crowdfunding and a 6 million total budget raise in global terms is quite significant.
Yes.
It's by no means record breaking, but it is a good performance.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody in Southern Africa has come close to that. So people are asking me to talk as an expert, somebody who's been through the process, somebody who's failed in many ways, but has also succeeded.
Yeah.
And then that gives its own momentum. So I wasn't doing any fundraising on Tuesday night when I gave that talk at Startup Grind that you attended. But people came up to me and said, how can I invest?
Yeah. Totally.
So that's paid for this trip and some. And and then the new secretary of the Old Boys Union at our school said, listen, we must form an entrepreneurs network for the old boys, and can you do the inaugural speech before the big game against the rival school at rugby? So that then gives it a real momentum.
Yes.
And that becomes very powerful. Well, I didn't sort of set out to do it though.
Yeah.
I was like, I want to give 600 million people electricity, need a new algorithm, need some funding.
Yeah.
The existing systems don't work, so we need to create our own system and just talk to people about it and be amazed how, if it resonates with them, they will respond. If it doesn't, well, no hard feelings.
Right. So my next question is about skill. The type of skill sets you use, and how you find them, and what kind of skills are you looking for? Like, what kind of people are you looking for in the company? But before we go to that question, just because you mentioned about social media and your background in advertising and stuff, so I am partly in a business like that where I have to convince people how important is social media in their business, because they still have the model of how it worked way back then. So they would spend more money in television and billboards and stuff, which is not that effective today. So how would you approach, how do you deliver the message to those type of folks that it's, this is the way to go right now?
Look, because I do come from an old media background.
Yes.
It's kind of hypocritical me trying to answer that.
Yes.
I was so embarrassed. Microsoft have been really helpful in our project. They've given us amazing access to free software, which we're really grateful for. And the representative of Microsoft was there on Tuesday night, and she said, well, can I hashtag a picture of us saying that you're a fan of Azure, which we are? I said, yeah, sure. And she said, well, what's your Twitter handle? And I said, hashtag Stephen Larkin 6. And she was like, oh my God. So that didn't get tweeted. So we have to be, I'm not nearly as social media savvy as I should be, and really, really am urgently trying to upskill there. The one little niche that I have found really effective is LinkedIn. One, because it's got so much data, and more data that can be mined than, say, Facebook or Twitter. Secondly, there's a dearth. It has very low engagement. I think the average LinkedIn person engages with it once every few weeks.
Yes.
Whereas Twitter and Facebook are several times a day.
Yeah.
But the third reason is that people basically just promote themselves all day.
Yeah.
If you can write thought-provoking articles, LinkedIn will actually promote you. So I was really profoundly happy about Murray winning the second Wimbledon last year.
Yeah.
So I wrote, being a statistical nerd, I sort of analyzed how, the big four in tennis were different to other eras, and if Murray hadn't been around Nadal and Federer and Djokovic. And immediately LinkedIn picked that up and promoted it all over the world. And I wrote a few articles on things like Brexit, women leadership, which is something that A&E wants to address in the industry. It's a horribly male-dominated industry, and I think really lacks strategic understanding because it is so male-dominated. And LinkedIn has actually promoted me. And I think I've got like a couple of articles got almost 1,000 likes.
Wow.
And 100,000 reads. Now, I didn't pay a penny for that. Facebook, what I find is that there are a few people in our shareholder base, and there's so much more that we can do. And I'm reluctant to sort of give ourselves as an example now. I'd rather give ourselves as an example in 6 months' time, because we're not very good now. But we urgently need to get very good in the next 6 months if we're going to achieve our fundraising target. Facebook gets you your friends and family. They're 3,000 people who I actually know, who if I see at a cocktail party, I will be able to say hello, James, to. They tend to read your stuff, whereas on LinkedIn they don't. So if you publish an article on LinkedIn, but you promote it on Facebook, and when I say promote it, don't buy clicks. I'm not clever enough. There are people who are clever enough to make money out of that, but I'm not one of them.
Yes.
But just ask key friends, like the guy who started our crowdfunding, Gordon Robinson. He's not, by his own admission, he's not at all technical, but he is one of the most sociable people I know. So he's got a real flair for social media, because social media is more social than it is media. So someone like Gordon Robinson, when he shares or retweets, it has a much bigger impact than most other people, because he's life and soul of the party.
Yeah.
And I think he's life and soul of the party online as well. So if you can get people who are influencers, and I'm not talking about Beyonce, just people who are regarded as cool and fun, people tend to read them. So that's how we have promoted it. But also, don't underestimate the power of the phone.
Yeah.
And another thing that is really counterintuitive, but obvious when you have the data, and I don't know how to change this, is that our best medium is actually post.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, the average age of our crowdfunders is 68.
Oh, I didn't even thought of that.
And 68-year-old people, 98% of them are male. Males tend to take more risks than females.
Yeah.
Incidentally, that's why females tend to get lower car insurance, because they're less likely to have an accident.
Yes.
And they tend to be better fund managers as well.
Right.
Because they take fewer risks.
Yes.
But anyway, this is big risk taking, which means that it's mainly a male hobby.
Yeah.
And incidentally, you know that LinkedIn, 80% of LinkedIn is male.
No, I didn't know that.
It's also counterintuitive. So, so I think that you have to use the phone a lot more than people think.
Yeah.
You have to meet people a lot more than people think.
Right.
And you've got to put things in the post. Now, in South Africa, that doesn't work because the postal system isn't particularly reliable.
Yeah.
But I was speaking to a friend of mine who is a very clever businessman, and he's built up quite a nice property portfolio, doing remarkably little work. So he's clearly good at what he does. And he said that because nobody ever receives letters, if you receive a handwritten letter in the post, it's going to stand out so much. It actually has way more impact than anything else.
Correct.
So, you know, we're talking about search algorithms and the latest way of Twitter feeding a LinkedIn and then an Instagram account. No, that's not how we did it. We did it with phones and letters.
Oh, so did you do that after you figured out like the age range of most of your investors were 65 plus?
It's even more embarrassing than that. They asked us. We should have worked it out, and we shouldn't have needed to have been asked. But it was just so counterintuitive for us as a technological company.
Yeah, totally. And it's hard. Yeah, it's actually hard to think like that when you're a technological positive. But anyway, if you had to say the most important thing about crowdfunding, what would that be?
The success or failure hinges on the video. And the video must not just be beautiful, high resolution, show a lot of passionate people in a team. People tend not to back a person, they're much more comfortable backing a team. It needs to really resonate and to bring something that is bigger than merely the company across. So the more of a social message they can give, the better. Now, in the UK, to find a skilled crowdfunding video producer, a video producer is not enough. They have to be a crowdfunding expert in video production. Costs about £3,000. I have not yet seen anybody in South Africa who has that specific niche of skills. Why the market hasn't really taken off yet. But if you are going to do an outstanding video, it's very common that a great video will result in £500,000 to £1 million getting raised, which means that your return on investment in that video is 160 to 330 fold, which you probably won't get out of your post office bank account.
Mm-hmm. Right. But did you have a video for your campaign?
Again, I have to answer that somewhat sheepishly. Yes, we did, but it was terrible.
Then why did it work?
Well, we had such a compelling story, and we worked really hard on the phones, and we did a lot of offline networking. If we have a great video, we will smash it out the park and start breaking some really meaningful records. So I'm pretty optimistic.
Yes.
Because we've got experts, social media experts who've look at us in bewilderment because they say your social media is actually terrible. How on earth have you been so successful?
Yeah.
Well, we've got bad advertising, but our product actually kind of sells itself.
Right.
So that's what saved us up to now. But it's a wonderful opportunity for us because if we have great media as well as the great product, I think we can raise exponentially more.
Right. So to keep it in the numbers, what were you aiming to raise and what have you raised so far?
We were aiming to raise about £8 million initially.
Right.
We've raised £6 million so far.
In how
3 years.
In 3 years.
Yeah.
Right.
But something strange happened when we originally started saying we were looking for natural gas. We were looking for 0.4 TCF, and the resource that we had analyzed over 10% of the concession, which is in a really focused area, suggested that we had round about that, which is the equivalent of 60 million barrels.
Right.
When we analyzed the whole concession, we found that there is, at minimum, if there is anything there at all that is extractable, is 25 times that.
Right.
So that required a larger budget because we had a larger resource and then needed to explore a far wider area than we had originally planned. So now we want to raise around about £20 million.
Right. Then I think if you use the video strategy,
we'll crack it.
Definitely you'll crack it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Coming to the next question is the skills part. Like, what kind of skills do you work with, and who are the type of people that you would want to work with or join?
On the crowdfunding side or the technical side?
On both sides.
Okay.
Mind, yeah.
Well, let's start with the technical because that's much simpler.
Yes.
On the recruitment side, we're currently looking for a drilling company man, we're looking for a geophysicist, we're looking for a geologist, we're looking for an electrical engineer with sensor expertise and embedded programming skills. We are also looking for a LiDAR expert, we have a gravity expert, and then we also we have a very skilled team on the ground. We've got a number of programmers, and we've got, between the three of us, I would say 3 pretty good mathematicians. So that's on the technical side.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got a fabulous field geologist. I think he's the most talented young geologist in Namibia, and Namibia has some serious talent.
All right.
Technically. You'd be surprised how, in fact, I think that Namibia is going to end up exporting oil and gas skills to other countries. On the crowdfunding side, we are underskilled at the moment. We need to build a team of people in a call center.
Yeah.
In fact, we're going to be building 2 teams. We're currently hiring, and I'm really pleased to say this, that, the former head of one of the biggest oil companies in the world, the head of their investor relations, is one of our crowdfunding investors, and he's agreed to move across to mighty A&E with its 9 employees, to go from a company that had over 100,000 employees, because he really believes in us, and he was a crowdfunding investor, so he's got to know us, and he thinks, I really think this can be a great company. So he's going to be running our investor relations / social media strategy. We're then going to be hiring a social media manager, and she will, I can't assume that it's she, but the 2 people we've interviewed were both women, will probably have some assistance. We are engaging on a contract basis a photojournalist. Funny enough, it was my wedding photographer who ended up working for Country Life and has a real passion for Namibia and its people. And, is a real hit with the local community. And we will also be looking for a TV production team, the Namibian Broadcasting, the NBC, Namibian Broadcasting Corporation, has offered us slots where we have to create production, but it is quite expensive to create. Then there's also a really exciting non-profit element to what we're doing in social media. We're launching, what we strongly believe in doing is by donating our technology towards charity where it's useful. So I'll give you an example of one of them that I think could have a profound effect on South African tourism. And that is that there are 8,000 cheetahs in the world, there are 20,000 lions, and there are only 4,000 wild dogs. Which is shocking, considering what iconic animals they are. And every one of those needs to be tagged. Now, we needed to create a telecoms network that could cover thousands of square kilometers to listen to our little geophones on the ground. Brendan, the co-founder, said to me, Steve, I'm part of my community watch. And can't we use the balloons to do infrared scanning to find where they're potential criminals? Because the guy in the kiosk won't know where they are. But if we've got a balloon, then we can track people and we can find them a lot more quickly than we otherwise would. Then we met with Africam, who have put cameras around watering holes, and they've got very big subscriber base. But they want to do so much more around conservation. And we realized that if we get these balloons up and we can tag the animals, and most poaching happens at night, we can then find that where the infrared or potential poachers or people who shouldn't be in the reserve at night are approaching one of the endangered animals, we can do something about it. Send in a drone, send in at least scare them by getting the drone to shout at them over an intercom or something like that. That would freak me out.
Yes.
So that, I think, can make for very, very compelling social media.
Yes.
And so now this is a tremendous trick that, well, not trick, but technique that I think a lot of NGOs or non-profit organizations can use. And it's a thing called Google AdWords for charities.
Yeah.
Pay-per-click is something your listeners will know a heck of a lot about and probably have lost money doing it. It takes a more skilled person than me to use it. But what Google has is an underused facility where they help charities by giving away pay-per-click for registered charities. And it's a huge budget. It's about $10,000 a month. And if you get celebrity endorsement, your website becomes compelling and you get more traffic, they'll up it to $40,000 a month.
Wow.
So that's $500,000 of pay-per-click free. Now, there are 9 charities that we are planning to support by deploying our technology to that charity. And I mean, another wonderful one with using this communication system is that we can pump educational content out to the internet to disadvantaged communities where they won't have to pay for that content because it's sitting on servers. And that way we can do science education, maths education, where the very best teachers can go and teach people in rural areas. They can outreach to them on their iPad. Now that's a great charity.
Yes.
And I think it could really resonate with a lot of people, and they would be prepared to donate to that.
Yeah.
So that more and more content can be created. And a third charity, which is really close to my heart, the idea actually came from my mother. My mom is a nurse, but she didn't work as a nurse because she had 4 children and she brought them up. And my father passed away when my mother was in her early 70s. And she really, because they had been married their whole life, she felt like, what am I going to do with the rest of my life?
Right.
It was a real existential crisis. And then, to our horror, she took a job as being the district nurse of Matatiele, which is a tiny little village in the former Transkei near the Lesotho border.
Right.
And the last 10 kilometers to the mission, or the Catholic mission where she was on donkey. You couldn't get a car there.
Oh, okay.
And she went there, and she had to leave after 6 months she was forced to leave by the bishops because she got dysentery, and if she hadn't left, she would have died. But she was so happy there. She really had a new reason for her existence.
Yes.
And ever since, she's kept in close contact with the community, and I think that they really loved to have her as well. They hadn't had a nurse for a long time, and my mother is one of the most giving and loving people around, and I think that's almost more important than the technical help that you give as a medical practitioner.
Right.
And she really found a reason for existence, and she wasn't allowed to go back to Matatiele, but then she started doing HIV monitoring in Masiphumelele, which is the local sort of township, informal settlement near to where we live, well, where she lives in Noordhoek in Cape Town. And it was going through a bit of difficulty with gangsters and what have you, and the police were too scared to go in there. But my mother went in every day because the community knew she was doing important medical research around AIDS and effectiveness of antiretrovirals. And like everyone was, just make sure you leave her alone because she's doing important work. Now, my mother got so much joy from that. Now, I know in the UK, because I live in the UK, that pensions have been decimated. And the state pension system in the UK is a fraud. If you think South Africa is bad, it has one of the best pension systems in the world.
Right.
The UK does not. All it has is an IOU where people's taxes are redistributed to pensioners. There's no such thing as a fund, and within probably a decade it will become unaffordable, which means that nurses and teachers who assume that they have a pension that they contributed to,
Yeah.
it's actually a Ponzi scheme because they contributed money to some other pensioner.
Yeah.
So it's going to go bankrupt. It's a mathematical certainty. So they are not going to have a pension. So wouldn't it be great if that teacher, that engineer, that nurse, that doctor, somebody with some kind of socially useful skill could maybe go out to the Kalahari, rent out their house, because houses cost a fortune in the UK and there's a buoyant rental market.
Yes.
And you have a charity that says you don't get paid a salary, but we will pay your costs, which will be minimal because things are pretty cheap in the Kalahari.
Right.
And you go and be a nurse there because there's a chronic skills shortage. In South Africa, we are short of 300,000 nurses.
Oh, that's a lot.
It's hideous.
Yeah.
And that is probably the biggest reason why our healthcare system is crumbling. Nurses are the engine rooms of the medical system.
Yes.
And if you don't have nurses, it's going to fall apart. And that's exactly what's happened here. So, and ironically, South Africa has exported a huge number of nurses to the NHS in the UK. So this is kind of revenge.
Is that? Oh, okay. Okay.
So wouldn't it be great if we could get retired nurses back?
Yeah.
And they will derive such happiness from, they will see the beauty of Africa, the Africa that I see in the Kalahari. And they'll rent out their house, so they're not drawing on their pension, so the pension pot will increase.
Yeah.
And they will actually be increasing their pension pot. So it will do a great deal for their financial well-being. But then the Kalahari gets a free, highly experienced nurse,
Yeah.
doctor, engineer, or math teacher.
Right.
And not only that, what started to happen when my mom went over there was that other people came and visited her. And those people got to meet with a very isolated local community. So they started to have sporting tours.
Right.
And they sent a soccer team down to Cape Town, and Cape Town soccer team went up to them. Cape Town started collecting clothes and money for them.
Yeah.
So it really does increase the networking abilities and the local tourism when you have people from Britain or Germany coming to Namibia or South Africa. So I think that charity could have a profoundly good effect, not just on South Africa, but on the people giving the charitable services.
Right.
So that I hope that gives a flavor, rather a long-winded answer,
Yes. Yeah.
about how social media can create a movement that is just as offline as it is online.
Right. My last question probably would be, so for the people that would want to join A&E, would they be working in Namibia?
A&E has had 64 consultants working for it,
All right.
and they come from 16 countries.
Right.
Unfortunately, some of the skills that we have are so rare that we don't have a choice where the person works and where they come from.
Okay.
So we're very multinational in terms of and multicultural.
All right. And for the people who want to invest, how does that work?
It really does depend. Obviously, British people get enormous tax benefits.
Mm-hmm.
So we prefer to take money from Britain because the investor is in a much more advantaged position than they are if, say, they invested from America.
Yes.
That said, we lobbied heavily with the South African government to give Section 12J, which makes it possible to deduct from your personal taxes investments into some of A&E's sister companies in South Africa, and we're planning to launch that in September.
Right.
And I think that's going to be game-changing for South African venture capital and for South African startup funding.
Yes. All right. Great. It was very nice talking to you.
Well, great. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate it. I learned a lot. And I never thought that the story was like that winding and so deeply involved. But thank you. Is there anything else you would want to talk about?